Well, good morning and thank you for joining us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on Treaty 6 territory within the Metis homeland and the Metis Nation of Alberta Region 4. We are acknowledging this land as traditional territories for many First Nations such as the Cree, Dene, Stoney, the Blackfoot, and the Abnuea community. IDEA is a nonprofit organization created by industry and community members that saw that our neighborhoods were going through changes. As Edmonton's housing stock came up for renewal and our schools and our mature neighborhoods dwindled in population, the IDEA community wanted to help create vibrant spaces and successful communities that gave options to all people. To follow the conversation on social media and find hashtags, follow YegVote and YegInfill. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll pass it over to Chelsea Jerzak, IDEA's president.
Thank you, Mariah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for day one of IDEA's elections panels that are happening all week, Monday through Thursday this week. So we do have an action-packed week, and we're pleased to kick it off today with candidates from 5 wards. We have Dene, Metis, Dene, Tastawiyinwak, as well as a candidate from Caraío as well. Before we get going, I just want to clarify what we mean by infill. So by infill, we're not just talking about skinny houses. Infill is actually much broader than that. So infill is the creative reuse or redevelopment of land or buildings in existing parts of the city. So with that definition in mind, I'm going to start asking our panelists some questions to get their take on infill. So IDEA does not endorse any candidates, and we invited all candidates from each ward to participate in a panel session with us here this week. The candidates that are here today and all week have self-selected, and I assume that's because they have something to say about infill and something to say to our members about their views on urban redevelopment. So with that, we'll get started and find out what that is. So to the candidates that are here with us today, I'm going to give you 1 minute for an introduction and then 2 minutes for every subsequent question. And depending on how time is going, I might ask you follow-up questions. We'll just monitor the time, and I will have a timer going for each answer. So with no further ado, I will go to Gabrielle first. Could you tell us your name, your ward, and why you're running for City Council? You'll have 1 minute.
My name is Gabrielle Battiste. My ward is Dene, where I live with my family and I have both of my businesses. I'm a 25-year lawyer, and I have been teaching city councilors, not our current council, best practices in their roles for the last 3 years. I want to work directly with stakeholders and residents to create a community that respects and uplifts small and local business, is safe for families, the elderly, and children to walk around in, and encourages healthy and active living. I've seen the decisions that have come out of council over the last 8 years, and many of them are contradictory. And so that has encouraged me to run, given my skills and background. I've run the police commission, overseen billion-dollar budgets across Canada, have worked in environment, the energy sector, and in construction. And I sit on the board of Savita, where we provide market, near market, and affordable housing for over 50,000 Edmontonians. I'm the only candidate that's trained specifically for this position and has all the necessary skills and qualifications. I'm here to engage with organizations like IDEA and citizens equally, not from a partisan perspective. I want to make sure that we have viable, creative, community-filled, walkable neighborhoods with infill. And I'm happy to be here to talk to you about that.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Next, I'll go to Ashley Salvador.
Great, thanks so much, Chelsea, and hello, everyone. Really happy to be here today, and a bit of a full circle moment. I actually sat on the board of IDEA many years ago because I was also very interested in how we can take steps as a city to really revitalize existing and mature neighborhoods. I'm running in Ward Metis, which is actually composed entirely of mature neighborhoods. So an incredibly relevant conversation for us today. So I'll tell you a bit about my background. I'm an urban planner. I have a master's degree in that. I'm also the founder of a local nonprofit here in town called Garden Suites, which is quite involved in the infill space. I do have direct experience working with City Council as well as administration to push for a variety of regulatory changes in the housing space particularly. And for me, running for council is about bringing all of my diverse experience together. So I've worked in housing, I've worked in economic development, even multiculturalism, seniors, inclusion. So I think we need a counselor who has a holistic perspective. You know, I'm not a single issue candidate. Right now, we need someone who can bring all those pieces together and help move us forward. And that's what I hope to do. And looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay, next on my screen is Anne Stevenson. We'll go to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me this afternoon. I'm really pleased to be speaking with IDEA, which I think is such an important organization in our city. So I'm born and raised in Edmonton, but had the chance to live and work abroad for 10 years. I received my master's in urban design and have been working in urban design and planning for about 15 years now. I think that infill is the most important thing we can be doing to build our city in a resilient, efficient, and inclusive way. And I was so proud of some of the work I was able to undertake while I was at the City of Edmonton, co-managing the zoning bylaw team, including the missing middle zone review, removing minimum parking requirements, and also sparking the zoning bylaw renewal process. I'm so keen to continue working with the infill industry to ensure that we're creating opportunities for you to build the type of city that we want, that we all want to have. And I appreciate the time to be here. Looking forward to talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, next up we have Lana Palmer.
There we go. So I just want to say thank you to IDEA for providing this forum. And I think these discussions are extremely important and valuable. My name is Lana Palmer, and I'm running for City Council in Ward Dene. I am an oral surgeon from Brazil by trade, and I immigrated to Canada in 2002. In the last 18 years, I have worked in the private sector and as well as being a small business owner. My husband and I are here raising 3 young children. I grew up in Rio de Janeiro, which is a city with 13.5 million people. So I do understand what a high density looks like and feels like. I'm running for city council because I want our city to be successful and innovative. I believe we need an agile city that is adaptable to the future. Things are changing, and we saw that play out very clearly in the last couple of years with COVID-19 and how we all had to pivot and adapt in so many ways and aspects of our lives. So change is here to stay, and we need to adjust and learn how to operate differently if we want to prosper. I believe I have the—
Thank you, Lana. That was your 1 minute. You'll have more time though, don't worry. So we're going to move on now to our last introduction, which is from Keren Tang.
Okay, hi everybody. So my name is Keren, and I am a candidate in the Southeast Ward of Gabrielle. And in my background is actually public health. I moved here a number of years ago to study public health over here at U of A, and have stayed to raise my family here. You know, I think as we move forward, pandemic or not, it's going to remain a very important lens for city building. You know, particularly when we think about the policies and the decisions that affect the well-being and the health of our communities. And this is my second time running. I ran back in 2017. You know, just for my professional life, you know, I've always spent a lot of time in the front line with communities and families, but with my public health degree, I've also spent some time in provincial and city government in policy. And wanting to be a strong bridge between, you know, people and the decisions made at the table is a big reason why I ran back then, and a big reason why I'm back here now. And the ward has changed quite significantly. And right now, Gabrielle, I would say, you know, if it's the majority, if not all of it, suburban, and divided north and south by the Henday, with Mill Woods from the 70s considered the more mature neighborhoods. Conversations about infill development has definitely started to come up at the doors. People asking about how and you know, what is the process to go through, and I've been in touch with Mariah and IDEA about that. So I support a city with dense population to support the systems that we have. And Chelsea, I'm just wrapping up to say that
I'm giving you a
I'm
big
excited.
smile. You know what that means.
Yeah, so I'm just here to to be part of this conversation because I think it is important that we have all kinds of tools to develop our city.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so I'm going to circle back up now to Ashley to start off our next round. Ashley, I'll give you 2 minutes. Our first question for you is, tell us a little bit about what your ideal neighborhood looks and feels like, and what is your vision for your ward?
All right, that's a great question. And it's interesting because that's a question I asked a lot of folks on the doors every single day. And, for me and what I'm hearing from residents in Ward Metis, we're really looking for walkability. We're looking for amenity richness. People want to really be able to embody that concept of 15-minute communities, which are really outlined in Edmonton's new city plan. So as we work towards a population of 2 million, there's a really big focus on gently densifying our existing neighborhoods so that people can live a little more locally. And that 15-minute concept is really the idea that you should be able to walk to a grocery store close by to your house, maybe walk to a cafe, maybe a bakery, butcher shop, childcare. So I'm really hearing that on the doors. I think Ward Metis in particular is uniquely positioned to achieve that. I said we are all mature neighborhoods here in Ward Metis. Historically, there has been population decline in our ward over the last 40 years. So there's a really big focus of our campaign around sort of welcoming people back. I know we're talking about infill, but sometimes I call it refill because we're almost refilling these neighborhoods that have lost schools, that have lost key amenities. People want that back. So that's a big focus of our campaign. And of course, something that goes hand in hand with that is having a well-connected transportation system. So investing in public transit is incredibly important, as is active transit. I think it's interesting. Bike lanes and bike infrastructure can be really divisive, but it doesn't have to be. People want to be able to safely get around, whether it is on foot, on bike, maybe a mobility aid, and we need to provide infrastructure so that they can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay, next we'll go to Anne.
One of the things I love most about Ward O'Damon is that we've already really achieved a lot of the outcomes that we're looking for in terms of the 15-minute community. Generally, our neighborhoods are quite compact. They're generally fairly walkable, lots of great destinations. We actually have 5 of the 13 main streets and business improvement areas in our ward. So for me, it's really building on our existing strengths, and some key areas that I want to focus on relate to housing choice and housing affordability. So I neglected to mention in my introduction that I currently work with the Right at Home Housing Society, and so I'm a nonprofit developer in the infill space. And I see the huge impact that having a range of homes in a neighborhood can provide. So our North Glenora net zero townhome project kept a local school open with 16 townhomes that were designed for large families. We were able to secure about 60, or I think it was 80 students for that local school. So just having a tremendous benefit throughout the neighborhood. I think, active transportation, really strong transportation network is a huge part of that, as is providing flexibility for adaptability over time. So from a commercial perspective, ensuring that we can creatively reuse our existing buildings in a way that doesn't have a lot of regulatory barriers to that. Tied into this in terms of the compact communities, creating really wonderful places to live, they also really help us achieve our climate change goals in terms of reducing our overall city footprint, both carbon and physical, and helping us ensure that we're resilient in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anne. Next, we'll go to Lana. And again, the question is, what does your ideal neighborhood look and feel like? And what is your vision for your ward? Go ahead.
I think that a great neighborhood is one that is inclusive to all. It's one that works for every single person that lives in it. It works for the small child, to the single person, to the couple that just got married, and to the seniors. I think Ward Dene is very diverse ward where we have a variety of range of peoples in all walks of life. We also have all kinds of different needs. And we also have all kinds of neighborhoods. We have new developments, and we have some of the most mature neighborhoods of Edmonton. So I think a very balanced approach is what is needed, so that we can do infill not only in the mature neighborhoods and use the infrastructure that we already have, but in the new ones that are being built up, that we do it the right way, that we maximize the potential that they can have, and not build something just for today, but something that's going to be viable and sustainable in the long run for our city. We also do need to look into our transit system, and unfortunately, the bus redesign basically was very detrimental to my ward. So those are a couple of things that I'm really looking forward to addressing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Next, we will go to Keren. You're up. Again, question is, what does your ideal neighborhood look and feel like, and what is your vision for your ward?
Yeah, I certainly think, much has been said around this idea of a 15-minute neighborhood. And I think Ward Gadahio is incredibly ethnoculturally diverse, with a lot of immigrants coming from very dense cities around the world that, have easy access to shopping, to schools, to places of worship. And that, I think that is, our communities that I certainly envision. I guess on a few things, the ward is has two sides to the Henday, and south of the Henday, we have a lot of the newer growth neighborhoods that, by the way that, the density targets have been set, they're actually by nature denser than the mature neighborhoods north of the Henday. And in many places, they are very walkable. There are lots of shared use paths. There's shops, not around every corner, but hopefully one day I would love to see that happen, so that people have easy access to the places that they work, that they play, and they worship. The ward is, diverse. I think that's has always been a central value for me, for our campaign. And it's not just for the benefit of multiculturalism, but it's also a safety issue. It also, it invites greater options for housing in terms of intergenerational housing, which a lot of families have chosen the ward to settle because of that. And so in some places, I think we are starting to really move towards that 15-minute neighborhood idea and concept. But without robust transit, and like Lana, our ward has been really hit hard. Suburban areas, we've lost a lot of routes, a lot of stops. I'm still meeting a ton of people who don't drive, and transit is their only way of transportation, and they can't get anywhere. They're in fact, blockaded in their home, and they have no easy access. So as much as we want to talk about 15-minute neighborhoods, without these tools, without these systems that are robust, we cannot make it happen. And my vision is to help develop those systems.
Thank you, Keren. Last we have on this question, Gabrielle.
There we go. So this is a really interesting question. I'm going to disagree a bit with Anne here for Ward O'Day-Min on having, Anne had said we achieved mostly what we need in our ward, and unfortunately I just don't see that. What I see is, number one, our ward, the new boundaries comprise really the basic history, character, and diversity of Edmonton. And right now we have a number of competing interests as a result of decisions that have been made, and as a result of the very high level and often contradictory city plans. So we have infill developers who are at odds with mature neighborhood overlay. And so there's that kind of tension that's being created here. We also have this center of poverty and despair that's been intentionally created, and it's spreading outward across the ward, impacting housing options with derelict and abandoned housing that would normally be ideal for infill, instead being held by owners who are waiting for premium profit. We need to change that and make it available for infill and redevelopment. And we also have Blatchford, which is prime real estate, just begging for faster development if we let it happen, and we must. We need to create that 15-minute walkable neighborhood. And right now, as people have said, transit is broken for those that need it most. They don't and can't walk 15 minutes or get around within 15 minutes because they don't have options. So when I hear that we need to develop our neighborhoods and what are the possibilities for our neighborhoods, we need densification and beautification, collaborative planning and design with proactive engagement by the city, increased vitality and energy driven by a larger community moving about. And most of all, we need to interact with agencies like IDEA to get you at the table to help us more to determine what kind of information we need to make better in more well-informed decisions, because right now we aren't getting all of the information at the council level and we haven't been asking for the right information.
Thank you, Gabrielle. That is your 2 minutes. Okay, so we're going to go from there into implementation and tactics. So in the previous question, we asked you about your vision. Now I want you to talk a little bit about how you plan to achieve that vision. Visions can be fun. Implementation can be a lot more challenging. So how do you plan to tackle that side of the coin? Anne, I'll start with you.
Sure, a fantastic question. And I think, a critique of my profession of city planning is that we often think that the plan is the end result, when really it's the implementation that we have to get right. So a key thing for me is the zoning bylaw renewal. I think that's sort of the most important piece of bylaw coming forward to this next city council. It's absolutely essential that we get that right and that we truly achieve the transformative potential that it has for our city. Continuing to invest in transit is another really significant piece that I really support. So filling in some of our missing gaps with our walking and cycling infrastructure, and also reviewing and strengthening the transit network redesign. Another one, which I'm sure many on the call can relate to, is around our utilities and infrastructure. So I've spent a lot of time working with EPCOR and Edmonton Fire Rescue Services, both in my role at city administration and in my current role with the Right at Home Housing Society. We still have not fully reckoned with those significant and unpredictable infrastructure improvement costs that infill developers face. We need to be tackling that much more proactively to ensure that we're removing that really significant obstacle. So those are some of the top issues that I think are most important for implementing the vision for the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, next up on this question on implementation and tactics is Lana.
I would say I agree with lots of things that Anne said. I think, first of all, like we were saying before, if people cannot get to places, that 15-minute walk is just beautiful talk. So we need to make sure that people actually can get to places in a reasonable amount of time. So transit is paramount in that enterprise. The other thing, I think that we need to focus on collaboration. I think city council, sometimes city management, infill, transit, it's almost everybody is doing their own little thing in their little bubbles, and no one's communicating. Things are not being done effectively that way. I think there is need to be communication is paramount, and the collaborations between all stakeholders is extremely important. We can only move forward if we all have the same objective in mind. Another thing that's very important and touched about it is infrastructure. And we need to make sure that it is feasible, because there's a lot of space that's left underdeveloped because the developer buy the land and then find out that they cannot afford to move the project forward. And maybe the solution, one of the things that I think city council needs to discuss is maybe having a levy, so that all projects that are done throughout Edmonton carry that burden, so that we can move forward. It's not just infill responsibility. If we want the city plan to work, we have to work together towards the common goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Next up on this question for implementation and tactics is Keren.
Okay, I guess three areas I'll just maybe highlight from our platform. I guess our platform is rooted in the pillars of community, economy, and climate. But from a community perspective, I would certainly love to see some underutilized neighborhood retail spaces, especially after a pandemic that has been really hard hitting on businesses. I wanted them to become community hubs to provide more spaces for folks to actually access through walking, through biking, through other modes of transportation. And I like to see an expanded and adapted corner store program to activate those spaces. I also want to see more permissive zoning to allow for more small businesses to operate within our neighborhoods, and I think that will contribute towards certainly 15-minute neighborhoods. And I think that comes down to, if we wanted people to live close to where they work, how are we leveraging the assets that we have and opening up those opportunities? I think there's some major opportunities in the Southeast that we're not tapping the full potential of. And I like to see ideas like, economic hot zones around certain areas to open up, opportunities for business to enter and that are more linked to the residential areas. And finally, I'll just say, we cannot have this conversation without talking about a robust public transportation system. And that's already been, I think that point has already been touched on by multiple people here. And so I see a connected and accessible transportation options, and not just transit, but other modes of mobility as pretty critical to connecting those dots. Thank you.
Thank you, Keren. Okay, next up we have Gabrielle. Over to you.
Thank you. So this is really critical. Bridging strategy to implementation is one of the most important things you can do. And right now it appears that the city has been stuck at the ideological stage for a bit too long without really understanding how to bridge that. There's no realistic plan right now to do that. And what we need to do is focus our efforts on what's really needed. There are gaps in baseline information needed to drive sound and informed decisions. And we need this organization, to help determine some of those gaps on infill reporting and data so that we can make well-informed decisions to support our infill goals. We need to review and maybe retire some contradicting plans and policies. Many of our planning policies are outdated and contradictory. We need to maybe create new district plans in collaboration with communities, developers, and stakeholders. We need to look at getting the information about all of the underlying costs. So not just business as usual costs, but roads, transit, parks, police, and waste management, as well as linear infrastructure like underground utilities. And we need to set greater infill targets so that we can actually aim to achieve those, get more diverse housing. We need an online portal as an option. We have to reduce the red tape and make this a facilitatory process rather than one where you just get stuck at the entry line position and can't move farther without a lot of effort. And we need to assess our fees associated with development. Right now, they're not in an easy to find place, and we need to make that homogeneous. We need to look more at engagement with IDEA and other organizations in order to see these come to fruition. You have to be at the table to help us be proactive in order to fix these issues and to have practical, focused solutions in place.
Thank you. 2 minutes on the dot, Gabrielle. Okay, so last for this question, implementation and tactics, we'll go over to Ashley.
Thank you. So the next few years are really going to be all about implementation and follow through. I think the current council has really set the stage for us to take some real action on things like climate change, on achieving those 15-minute communities, and really following through on the city plan itself. So a few levers that our campaign is focused on. One, the zoning bylaw renewal. So that is the primary lever that we see as really the way to open the door for more creative, more affordable infill within our city. Right now, there are a lot of regulatory barriers in the way and things are quite prescriptive. So being able to embed flexibility into the zoning itself, I think is going to be a really fantastic way for us to achieve those walkable, vibrant, amenity-rich communities. The other big one that we talk about is on the infrastructure side. So the growth management framework is something that we're following very closely. And that's going to be a really big conversation for the next council, because that's where we get to discuss how do we really sort of lay the groundwork, literally, in terms of infrastructure, so that we can start to see higher density development, specifically along nodes and corridors. And looking at our ward in particular, in Ward Metis, there's a number of main streets that I'd like to see some movement on. 101 Ave is something that comes up quite a lot. And there's just huge potential there to have a vibrant, thriving, walkable main street. But there needs to be a conversation about getting the zoning right, and also removing something that we kind of jokingly refer to as the first mover disadvantage. Because when you're the first person on a block coming in to do a larger scale infill project, you're burdened with the infrastructure upgrade costs for really that entire strip. So we need to have a conversation about how to have a more effective cost sharing program to really facilitate that. There's also district planning that's on the table. And I will say the energy transition strategy is another big strategy that's on the table that we need to move towards implementation. That is going to require some pretty significant investment. And we are going to need councillors who have the courage to say yes to that. And it looks like my time is up. Thanks, Chelsea.
I actually forgot to set the timer for you, but that felt like 2 minutes. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to our next question now, starting with Lana. So we've spoken now about vision, about implementation and tactics. The next question that I would like you to grapple with is, how would you balance community and industry priorities around infill and urban redevelopment? Understanding that we're transitioning now from a big small city to a small big city, and change is uncomfortable. So how would you as a councillor manage that?
I think there's three things that need to happen. I think our actions need to match our intention. So if we are actually intent on doing that, we have to promote that as a city and be forward thinking and bold about our vision. We need to be accountable. I think that's one way that you can balance. People want transparency. So when you bring all parts to the table, infill, developers, the community, when they feel that they are heard, when anyone feels that they are heard, maybe they won't agree 100% with the decision that is made, but they will understand and they will appreciate the fact that they were heard and that all perspectives were laid out and the best decisions for the community was made. Maybe it was not the best decision for me as Lana as an individual, but the decision that's made, it's going to be very clear that it's the best one for the city moving forward. And we need to measure our performance. The way to get everybody on board is sharing our successes, sharing the things where things are going right. Well, maybe share the things that are not going right and say, okay, we're learning from this, we're going to move in a different direction. But I think if everybody is involved, if there's transparency, then our community of citizens and our community of developers of all sectors will have trust in us. Thanks.
Thank you, Lana. Okay, I'm going to go over to Keren next to answer the question about balancing community and industry priorities.
And I really feel like this question is kind of getting at the heart of issues around public and community engagement around topics such as infill. I think I think not only is knowledge is power, but issues around housing and around some of the really complex stuff. I think it boils down to the humanity of it. By that, I mean, one of the things that really opened up my eyes around infill development was actually when I participated in the infill tour several years ago and talking to everyday Edmontonians who share about why they made those choices to develop their garden suites, for example, and why they're moving into, particular housing types. I think IDEA has done a really great job in the past few years developing those key messages when communicating with community members. And I know I certainly used, leaned on that during the 2017 election, where half of the ward was mature neighborhoods going through some very sticky times when it comes to infill and housing redevelopment. And as someone who's also been kind of in the realm of public engagement with the guiding coalition on public engagement, one of the key things that we kind of come up is that, if ultimately a decision was made and I didn't agree with it, what does that mean? I was not engaged. And I think part of balancing those priority is, certainly a thorough process is needed, but when something doesn't necessarily happen or when this decision is made, how are we accountable back to the community and sharing the whys and how we often miss that step. And in the end, it actually creates more conflict. And I think as a city, as these processes, we should be alleviating and building understanding rather than creating more conflict. So I suppose, at the end of the day, the city needs to be developed, needs to densify, and we need to have the messaging, which I think you're all already doing a great job of that, and accountability to convey those thoughts at the end.
Thank you, Keren. Okay, I'm going to go over to Gabrielle now for the same question.
Thank you. So right now, community and neighborhood, like developer and neighborhood priorities are actually quite similar. Everyone wants to achieve infill climate goals, walkable neighborhoods, and other things. What people often forget is that infill developers live in this city with us. They're community members. And developers I've spoken with and each O'Damon community that I've sat down and spoken with talk about this exact point, about the need for having both parties at the same table, and to what everyone else has said, that proactive engagement. However, the transparency and engagement from everyone can't happen unless the city makes it easier for developers to be transparent, because right now that isn't happening. There isn't a transparent fee structure, and often developers don't know until the last minute what fees there are that are going to be paid, and that has a huge impact. And so when it comes to that, we need to review and update the volume 4 of the city's engineering, design, and construction standards. We need to create a predictable fee structure for contributions to system upgrades as a whole, not a piecemeal one-off where infill residents and small businesses are wholly responsible. We need a holistic long-term solution. That is going to help the city. When the city is much more transparent about what it's charging developers, developers can be more transparent about what they're doing, and residents can be earlier engaged and more proactively engaged. And so I think that together with those three aspects at the forefront, we can actually make this work for everyone, because we are working towards the same goals as neighbors in the same communities.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Okay, over to you, Ashley.
Thanks so much. So I think there's some work to be done around setting expectations around, where we're looking to see higher density development and more infill. And one of the ways that I see that sort of coming to fruition moving forward is through district planning. So district planning is really a process that's going to outline, along major nodes and corridors where we can expect to see higher density. And in our ward in particular, I always look at the Valley Line Southeast, which is hopefully going to be open very soon. We still have single family homes lining the Valley Line Southeast, for example. So being able to have conversations, not just with industry members, but with the community around, what the future of that type of line and that type of corridor holds, so that no one's caught off guard. I think that those expectations need to be set at the outset, and district planning is the way to do that. Another thing that I think we need to work on is communicating trade-offs. So, a lot of Edmontonians that I speak with, they want climate action. They want those 15-minute communities. They don't like that schools are closing. They don't like that grocery stores are leaving. So being able to make the connection between those priorities and infill as a really important solution, that's important. So bridging that gap and helping people understand that if we are gently densifying neighborhoods, we're going to have more kids to fill our schools. We're going to have more people and customers to frequent our businesses. And infill is really a mechanism to achieve some of those higher order priorities that Edmontonians So I don't think there's a huge divergence between, community members and industry members. It's about being really partners in city building and achieving the goals outlined in the city plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. Last but not least on this question, we have Anne. Over to you.
Thanks so much, and a fantastic question. I think there's sort of four key things that I would highlight. So the first is ensuring that community is engaged at the point at which they can have the most meaningful contribution. So I think unfortunately what happens is that we get down to the development permit level where there really isn't much opportunity for community input. And then people are feeling unheard and not included. So it's really, encouraging people to get involved in processes, recently the city plan, but through the district planning process, so that they can provide their engagement where it can be most meaningful and effective. Another piece is staying focused on the long-term goals. So in the short term, construction and change is very disruptive and it is very challenging. So instead of focusing on what that immediate impact is, it's reframing it around how a development supports our long-term goals and what Edmontonians are wanting to see in their communities. I think it's also important that we validate some of those frustrations and some of that sadness of what people are losing. People are so connected to their neighborhoods, and it's hard to see things that we love changing. So spending time saying that it's all right that we feel that way. But again, it's that trade-off, it's working to the broader goal. And finally, I think mitigating some of those practical annoyances and challenges that residents face. So I really appreciate IDEA's work on increasing industry education and good practice. I love the idea of providing expedited permits for sort of proven builders who are minimizing disruption to neighbors. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Anne. So what we're going to do now for our last round of questions is, the reality is that we have a ton of questions that we would love to ask all of you and not nearly enough time. So I'm going to give you some options and you can choose what topic you'd like to speak on. So your options are, give us your take on housing affordability and what we can do. If you think that's a problem, what we can do about it. That's option one. What do you think are any barriers to infill development and how might we address them? Option two. Option three, what do you consider to be the top policy direction in city plan? So those are your three potential questions. I'll read them again. What's your take on housing affordability? Is it a problem in Edmonton? And if so, what would you do about it? What do you think are barriers to infill development and how might we address them? And then lastly, what do you consider to be the top policy direction in city plan? Okay, I think leading off the top on this round is Keren. I'll start with you. Hopefully she's still there with us. Keren, are you there? Yes, I see you.
I was just writing down some of the, yeah, I guess maybe just, I'll just comment briefly around housing affordability issue. I think, quite frankly, for many people, Edmonton remains one of the more affordable markets in Canada, but for increasingly, people are spending more than 30% of their income on, rent or mortgage, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to stay where they're housed. I guess for us, in this ward in particular, we're having such a different parts of the ward facing very different housing needs. And one of my priorities is around how do we make sure that folks get to stay in their housing and have the support that they need. In our Housing for All, plank for the platform, I would love to see more specifically affordable housing distributed appropriate for the neighborhood, for the diverse communities, for the the intergenerational piece, distributed throughout the city and co-locating wherever is appropriate with city and social services. Right now, housing affordability is certainly top of mind, but I also think the other end of the spectrum of that in terms of servicing our most vulnerable population is also extremely top of mind. And so that is certainly one of our priorities for the platform.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, next up, I'll go over to Gabrielle.
Thank you. So I'm going to address some of the barriers because those barriers also serve to help inform how we get affordable housing and other things. So probably one of the top barriers is the infrastructure costs. So when a project starts, those costs are just not known and predictable. And that's a huge barrier to being able to get things done collaboratively and get things done inexpensively. So we need to have the ability for industry to use contractors when it comes to basic things like utility hookups. We don't have right now something to holistically and systematically deal with infrastructure upgrades. So we need to consider things like a citywide levy. We also have a huge bottleneck when it comes to permits and processes, and we need to change the culture from administration to facilitation. Right now, our online portal doesn't do well. We need to invest in making that better. We need to also review how much fees are for each style of development project. I mean, those who are building should predictably know what the fees and carrying costs are that they can expect beforehand. And we need to have a good structure of financial incentives. Where can we get more income, you ask? Well, we can put our AUMA suggestion to establish a new funding model, predictable, linked to the province's revenues, that's giving municipalities more tax room and based on a long-term agreement that's inflation indexed. So that was adopted by AUMA in 2020 and should be an active advocacy point moving forward. We need a renewed fiscal framework that will be able to help us have certainty, help developers have certainty, help communities and neighborhoods have certainty. And finally, we need to have the right people at the right place at the right time. We need idea at the table. We need developers at the table. We need community members at the table. Everyone has the same end goals, and together we can make them happen.
Thank you for that, Gabrielle. I'm going to go over to Ashley now.
Great. So I'm going to speak about housing affordability because that's something that comes up quite regularly in Ward Metis. And as I mentioned in my previous comments, we really are trying to attract younger families to these areas, refill them. And one of the primary things that folks are looking for is affordable, family-friendly housing. And they're often trying to make that decision between whether they are going to buy into a more mature neighborhood or if they're going to buy in more of a newer suburban setting. And oftentimes they're choosing that suburban option because they feel like they're getting sort of more value. They can get a much bigger house, but there's still that desire to live centrally and live closer to the core. So I think being able to provide that additional layer of affordability in an infill context is just imperative to the health and vibrancy of our communities. And for a long time, at least the last decade here, we have mostly seen, skinny homes or narrow lot homes being built in our mature communities, which, works for some folks. But being able to have a more diverse spread of infill typologies, I think is really, really necessary. So, more duplexes, more semi-detached, even more missing middle style housing. I think that's really where we're going to see that affordability gain. Missing middle is an interesting term because it both describes sort of middle density. It's not a single family home, it's not a tower, but it also describes sort of that missing middle level of affordability that a lot of families are looking for. So I think that's where we need to get to. And of course, being able to strip away some of the existing barriers around zoning, around permitting, around infrastructure, that's what's going to help us get there. And then if I have time, quickly on the flip side of that spectrum, because affordability and affordable housing is on a really big spectrum. For more of our commercial districts and main streets, one thing I hear over and over is the safety of the district. People want to know that vulnerable and marginalized folks are taken care of. So investing in permanent supportive housing is part of this conversation too. Being able to work with higher orders of government to get funding down to our municipality so that we have permanent supportive housing with wraparound mental health supports, addiction supports, employment supports. That's going to really contribute to the type of environment where folks are going to want to invest and reinvest and redevelop our main streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Anne, over to you.
Well, I also have to choose housing affordability. Working in the affordable housing sector right now, that's definitely a key passion of mine. So, I have a lot of thoughts in terms of addressing sort of the non-market housing affordability equation. So that's, permanent supportive housing, bridge housing to help transition folks who currently don't have homes into a permanent place to live. And if you're interested in some of those ideas, there's more available at annstevenson.ca/housing. But I want to spend a bit of time talking about market affordability. And I think, unfortunately, that is one sort of promise of infill that hasn't been realized yet. That's often what I hear from neighbors. Infill is supposed to provide affordable housing, and look, this skinny is $800,000. And I think that's really a factor in how we've created some false scarcity and really limited different housing options. So as Ashley mentioned, townhomes, stacked townhomes, those provide a really great level of affordability for many, many households. And unfortunately, our current zoning really precludes that from occurring in most of our mature neighborhoods. So creating opportunities for those housing forms to exist throughout our neighborhoods, our mature neighborhoods, I think is absolutely essential in bringing those price points down, and also improving energy efficiency in terms of the opportunities there with joined housing forms. Providing, again, flexibility to have secondary suites. That was another project I worked on at the city, just to expand those opportunities so there can be mortgage helpers for the homeowner, and also affordable rental options in all of our neighborhoods. As has been touched on as well, clearly working on regulatory barriers, faster permit timelines, and more predictable permitting timelines, and addressing the infrastructure cost barriers that can be put in place. I think all of those things working together help us get to market affordability. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And last person on this question, we have Lana. Take it away.
Hi. So I want to talk about housing affordability. And I think ultimately it comes down to, it is a great issue, and it comes down to two aspects. I think one of them is the lack of leadership and decisiveness in our city. We need to have a city council that changes the culture, where we are creating a culture that empowers people to make decisions. City council cannot make every single decision in the city. So we need to empower our infrastructure to make good decisions in a timely manner. And I think the other barrier that we face is the bureaucracy that comes in so many levels, from infrastructure to bylaws to zoning, that is ultimately a passing cost that will be paid by the person that's buying the house. Just as an example that I can give is years ago, for a land title, it took 5 days to have it processed. The last couple of years, it has been taking 4 weeks, and today it takes 2.5 months to do that. So there is no reason why it takes so long for something like that. And that we can see that all throughout our process. One example of something that we could do to mitigate that is use technology, blockchain. Estonia is using blockchain to process their land titles, and then they're doing that in a matter of minutes. So there's no reason why Edmonton cannot take advantage of that. So we need to be forward thinking, and moving ahead in that direction is imperative. Thanks.
Thank you so much to everybody. That was a whirlwind and a lot of information from some very well-informed candidates. So thank you all for joining us today. Again, we had Gabrielle Battiste, Ashley Salvador, Anne Stevenson, Lana Palmer, and Keren Tang, who are running for council positions in Ward Ode-Min, Metis, Dene, Tastawiyinwak, as well as Karayo. So with that, I am going to hand this back over to Mariah Samji, who's the Executive Director here at IDEA, to make some closing comments. Thank you to everyone who joined us here today.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and thank you to all the candidates who joined us today. One of IDEA's foundational values is we build Edmonton together. So I'm so happy that you were able to make the time to have this conversation with us and our members, and to all those who watch this over the upcoming weeks leading up to the election and beyond. So thank you so much for that. As all of you know or may not know, that it is election week here at IDEA. So we do have a section on our website that talks about election issues. So issues identified by our members, as well as surveys that these candidates here today have filled out, but also other candidates around the city. We do have lunchtime panels today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday for all the different wards, as well as the mayoral candidates on Thursday, which is going to be really exciting to hear from everyone all week. So go check that out. And as a last plug, please do make sure that you check all the candidates' websites, because we have some of their information, but they have a lot of their information on their website and social media. So I have one more second before it turns 12 o'clock and we all turn into pumpkins. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the weather. And we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.